maybe a little quicker, right? This process required quite a bit of research in order to get to where we are today. I anticipate the federal government will be issuing some type of information report based on the comments that they receive as part of the new regulations that are coming out in July. So if and when that comes out and we review it and there's something that we haven't addressed, it would be quite simple for us to revisit whatever policy we create.
Okay, my next question is, and I apologize, I have a hard time relating to what, and you made the comment that 50 grams requires 250 plants. Is that correct? If somebody needs 50 grams a day, they need 250 plants to keep up that supply. Is that correct?
Through the chair, that is correct. There is a formula, there's a calculator that's available through the federal website, which shows based on what your prescription is, how many plants you can grow. And I believe it factors in things like crop loss, it factors in things like processing. So when you process the plant, and let's say you were making it into oils or a more of a concentrated form so that you didn't have to smoke it, you could ingest it. Every time you process it, it just requires more plant material. So I believe it sounds so high is because, sorry, the reason why it sounds like there are so many plants is because it just requires that much leafage in order to make the product you need in order to have that 50 grams per day.
Okay, and the other like reading the comments from the different, like fire and the ag group or advisory board and so forth, I guess I'm startled. If we adopt one of your recommendations here, what would the policing, like, is this something our bylaw officer would have to go out and enforce? Is that going to be a bit of a problem, or?
Through Mr. Chair, ultimately this would boil down to a bylaw enforcement issue, and it would be treated just like any other bylaw enforcement issue. It would be, an order would be placed, there'd be a warning, an order, and then it would end up in the court.
On a complaint basis, I assume we would deal with it?
That's correct. That's correct.
That's all I have for now, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Geisens, please.
Thank you. I think I'm ready. Through you to Matt, I've got a couple of things. What we have run into, and what really bothers me more than anything, I guess, and a whole lot of things with this, is that there's very little regulations from either the province or the feds, as far as I'm concerned, and I think they have something to play here. We have had a couple of incidents where there are marijuana greenhouses growing way beyond what they should be producing, and there's nothing being too much about it. The hard part I have is that these children are now having to inhale the smell of that marijuana, and to me that is the worst thing that can possibly happen. What I'm looking for in all these that you've put forward, which one of those would give us the best, I guess, enforcement to stop this by either forcing people to put either charcoal or carbon filters so there is no smell that comes out of the greenhouses? Is that something that can happen? That's all. I mean, we can say, well, this might happen or that might happen, but I think somewhere along the line here, this council is going to have to say this is something that we have to deal with. If the feds and the province don't want to, we're going to have to. So to me, you know, when we have separation for cattle and chicken and everything like that, maybe we need that for marijuana as well. And as far as I'm concerned, we need these filters so we don't have that problem. This one family, on days that the wind comes their direction, it's pretty bad, and I can't blame them. They are very, very upset. And I know the mayor who knows who I'm talking about. Thank you.
Through the chair, there are a number of options here that could help with that. Option D would help in reinforcing an existing policy we have and would help with any cleanup for legal nonconforming. And then options F, G, and H would also create a new definition within our zoning bylaw in which cannabis production and processing would fall under. So those would be the options that you would want to look towards. Like I said earlier, my only caution with G and H is the limiting access issue.
Thank you. Councillor Columbus, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is an exceptionally good report, Matt, and this is a huge issue. From what I see going up around the Norfolk countryside, I think we're going to be the cannabis capital of Canada. We lead in a number of other crops, so we'll probably lead here too. But just some questions here. Health Canada is part of your task force, and are they taking this message seriously back to Ottawa to set some more firm regulations around this for all the municipalities, Matt? I've phoned Health Canada several times about different issues. I leave a message. I have never had a reply back yet from anybody after making several phone calls. So are they prepared to answer the questions of municipalities?
Through the chair, I believe they are willing to help answer those questions. It did take a little bit of effort to get the right contact at Health Canada to get them on the phone and into our task force meeting. But once we did reach the right contact, they were very willing to help and very willing to listen. They explained their policy to us, how an application is received, how the license is issued. There are definitely some monitoring and some follow-up inspections from the individual and designated grower sites that is missing from their current framework. And that's going to be a comment that we send along prior to January 20th. And hopefully those comments are heard and hopefully they're addressed in future versions of the ACMPR. But for the time being, the message that we've received from Health Canada is that as a municipality, we are capable of regulating these uses ourselves. And what's interesting is that, you know, this is taking the form of what MDS took back in the 80s, where livestock facilities were regulated on a municipal scale. Everybody was doing it differently, and then finally the province stepped in and said, hey, look, we have to all play on the same playing field, and they stepped in and created the MDS formula, and it regulated things in Ontario. I see that maybe happening with this in the future. And again, probably not just for cannabis, but for crops that have the potential to cause the adverse effect.
Thank you for that. I too see the MDS formula as the best way to go. Now, there are a number of greenhouse operations and grow ops, whatever we want to call them, in place right now where the greenhouses are being constructed. And I believe their goal is to acquire a license for recreational cannabis. And how will that be judged? Like some of them could be fairly close to a residence or a number of residences. Do we look at that when we're putting when the building permit is applied for?
Through the chair, the applications that we have been receiving, if they are for medical marijuana production facilities, which would be under that part 1 of the regulation, that part 1 would also be where your recreational facilities would end up as well, because it's a commercial entity. They would require the same kind of setup as what the medical facilities do, which in our case, they have to specify what they're growing. They get put under site plan control. They go through our pre-consultation process. staff are very involved with those. So I imagine from the recreational standpoint, as it stands today, those facilities, yes, we would know about them, and we would already be processing them as we would any type of site plan. It's the designated and individual grower facilities that they would be applying for a greenhouse. They wouldn't specify what they're growing, and later we would find out that they're growing cannabis.
So how do we control that down the road if in fact it is close to a residence?
Through the chair, if there was a definition in the zoning bylaw that outlined that the growing of a certain type of crop was considered different from a different crop, so for instance, if we had the new AONIS definition in our zoning bylaw that defined the growing of marijuana and mushrooms as being a noxious type of use, then it would be triggered through likely a complaint. Then the complaint would be put through to our bylaw enforcement, and the bylaw enforcement would follow up with them explaining to the landowner that what they're doing isn't permitted in our zoning bylaw, and it would go through that entire process then.
Thank you for your answer.
Councillor Oliver.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Matt, I have a few questions for you. Firstly, on page 99 of our agenda, which is page 3 of the report, this is where you outlined the Health Canada proposed approach to the regulation, and you highlighted in italics, I guess, a few of the key points, and most particularly towards the bottom of that page where it says municipalities may choose to enact bylaws which deal with odors emanating from personal production sites. However, they're non-prescriptive on this issue. So is that what we're using in a sense as our green light, should we choose to do it, to go ahead and implement regulations under our zoning bylaw?
Through the chair, that's correct.
Okay, but you do acknowledge on that page that at this point, this is only a recommendation or a white paper or whatever. What's going to be the timing from what we've heard from Health Canada before this will in fact become part of their regulation and therefore the enabling legislation for us to do our zoning bylaw? Is it going to happen shortly, or could we be looking at 6 to 12 months before they actually get around to making it official?
Yeah. Through the chair, we are capable of enabling our policy now.
Okay.
What they are doing in terms of updating their own procedures through the ACMPR is tightening up their own regulations. So ours would be in addition to what they do.
Okay, and we can legally do that today?
According to Health Canada, we can.
All right, thank you. My next question goes to your proposed amendment, or option D rather, which is to amend, more importantly, option F, which is to amend our bylaw to include all cannabis production and processing and permit them in the agricultural zone. And you talked about how we could implement this through what you described as self-regulation. In other words, if the producer has air purification equipment and they're growing the marijuana inside greenhouses, then that would all be covered, subject to a setback. But for the potential of growing it outside, where they can't do that odor control and can't self-regulate, then we would impose a more significant setback. Can you give us any suggestion as to what that might be? I thought I read somewhere 500 meters. Is that the kind of setback you would be contemplating in this amendment for outdoor grown marijuana?
Through the chair, the idea of the setback was intended for outdoor growing and also indoor growing that did not have odor control.
Right, correct.
The exact buffer at this point hasn't been determined. I will say that there are other municipalities in Ontario, I want to say Essex County, that uses 500 meters as their benchmark from medical marijuana production facilities. And that buffer would include odor reduction. So, that number right now is in the air. It's hard to say what exactly the number should be. It would be nice if there was a little science to help confirm what the number should be. But for the time being, I would suggest that it would need to be more than the existing 150 meters,
Yes.
which we regulate at now.
Right, okay. And my final question on option F is that it includes, if you like, option B already, doesn't it? Because option B talks about placing cannabis greenhouses under site plan control, but under option F, I see it would also include having them under site plan control. Is that correct?
Through the chair, that's correct.
Okay, thank you. And my final question goes back on page 107 or page 11 of your report, where it talks about the Normal Farm Practice Protection Board. I was surprised when I read, and I'm sort of looking at the members of our audience as well, that the Normal Farm Practice Protection Board, which is the body, it seems, that decides what is normal farm practice in Ontario, has not yet received a complaint from anyone regarding odors from marijuana production. Should we be encouraging residents even today who are experiencing these kinds of problems with production facilities adjacent to them to make complaints to that body as well as the others that they have been complaining to?
Through the chair, I have also been recommending that step. And at the date this report was written, I believe they hadn't received a formal complaint, but I'm guessing that by now they probably have.
Okay, good. That because I think at every level we need the senior governments to be helping us to solve this problem. So thank you for those answers.
Next up is Councillor Height.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to planning. Matt, I was wondering, I'd like to go back to the start where we received the complaint. Now, in that complaint, is that the one where we had the property with like 10 different addresses? The main complaint that's front and center on here right now.
Through the chair, there was 4 911 addresses on that property at the time.
So that's the main culprit, and that we've addressed because basically it was our fault. We've allowed them to have multiple addresses so they could grow umpteen times the crop that they should have been allowed. Okay, now, are we receiving complaints today about the odor issue?
Through the chair, yes, we do receive quite a few complaints about odor.
Today? Like in the last week, minus 30 outside?
Through the chair, yes. I received a phone call yesterday morning about one.
So I guess I wonder how that's even possible. Are they heated greenhouses? Is it, okay, so, and they just...
Through the chair, these act just as any greenhouse would. They're heated. They're operating 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. They have their plants going through the same types of cycles that other greenhouses would, say for like tomatoes. So it's, yeah, they're in full scale operation.
Okay, so as I understand it, we have like an offensive light bylaw in Norfolk County where it can be enforced. That's correct? So if the light's a problem, you can call bylaw enforcement and have an officer come there?
We, through the chair, there is a provision in our zoning bylaw that relates to outdoor lights. So, for instance, if you put up an ice rink in your backyard and you had floodlights or something like that, and the light from those floodlights were coming into your backyard or your kitchen window or something like that, we have a provision in our zoning bylaw that deals with that. However, that bylaw doesn't explicitly relate to light emanating from a building.
Okay, so we'd have to look at that. Now, you mentioned here potential obnoxious uses. So if we were to go that route, well then, could we not be called upon to enforce certain things such as pollen, rye, goldenrod, something that someone finds obnoxious? Because I know some people that I know have a heck of a time when rye comes out that they can't breathe properly. Would that trigger something?
Through the chair, that issue's come up in the past. The current definition for the obnoxious use is quite vague, and it does leave some interpretation up to staff. The production of rye or something like that would be something that would be considered a normal farm practice, so it would likely not be something that we would consider an obnoxious use. However, the production of marijuana, it's a very different animal. Just like the production of mushrooms, it's a very different animal. So we're looking to treat them as such.
So, like personally, I like the MDS idea where the province comes and sets it all and we don't have to get into it. Now, I was following a case where a neighbor had dumped a whole bunch of cow manure on the fence of his other neighbor because they didn't like him. And the municipality didn't get involved. It's a lawsuit. It's, your neighbor is a nuisance. So I guess I can't really understand why the complainant hasn't taken that route and why they're asking us and why we're actually getting involved in it when you could just simply hire your lawyer and take them to town in a court of law.
Through the chair, I'm not certain why they haven't chosen to go that route. We're acting on council's request to look at the policy.
Is that not an option for them? Because I'm thinking it is.
Through the chair, I'm not a lawyer, but it may be an option for them.
Turn your mic back on.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One of the problems I've had is I've had several people phoning me that rely on their medicine. Okay, so if you're going to put them into site plan control, they're very concerned on how you're going to handle that. Now, would that not appear as a zoning bylaw so that number 14-32 points to this certain particular property?
Through the chair, if they live within the agricultural area or if they live in an industrial area, depending on which option you go with, if you went with, say, option F, it would be a permitted use, and then they would be put under site plan control. So they would have to go through the site plan control process, which would include our pre-consultation process. They would have the option of self-regulating through option F, which would mean they would have a buffer distance from a sensitive land use of 150 meters, just like our existing medical marijuana production facilities. If they chose not to have odor controls, then that buffer distance would be much greater. Alternatively, they could come to council and request relief from the zoning bylaw.
Right, and that's probably what they won't do. Because one of the concerns that they had was if it's in the public, it's a very valuable crop. We're actually putting their lives in danger should the criminal element find out where these facilities are. And that's not uncommon.
Through the chair, as of July 1st, everyone can grow 4 plants of their own. So I imagine in 6 months' time, it will likely not be as big of an issue as it is today.
But saying that, you will still have people that can grow their 250 or 1,000 plants, which are still worth $100,000 or whatever it's worth. And, you know, it makes a lot of people really uncomfortable, and to think that they're going to come to council and ask us is a whole different story, you know, so I'm not sure.
Through the chair, ginseng's another type of crop that also has a very large, very high market value. So similar argument could be made there, but more importantly, through site plan control, we would be looking at things like security requirements so that those concerns could be addressed.
But I'm not talking about their security, I'm talking about how do you protect that data? As Norfolk County, how do you keep that hidden?
Yeah, through the chair, if they were to conform with the bylaw, it would just be as simple as going through our site plan process, and the site plan process isn't something that comes to council. So it would be a relatively discrete process for them to go through.
And that's hidden and secured on county something? Like where do you keep that file? Electronically?
Through the chair, it's stored on our an internal like a system that is under lock and security.
With planning having access and possibly a
Staff
breach?
would have access to that, just like we do a lot of other personal information like species at risk and that other
So
sort of stuff.
basically a data breach would give you your whole entire list of growers?
Possibly.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Luke.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of comments. I do have a question for Matt, but I do want to echo a couple of comments here. First of all, I want to thank Matt and your staff and your cannabis committee, task force. Mr. Chair, I think they've done a great job basically dealing with something that is a first for this council and certainly a first for many municipal governments to have to find out what we can do and perhaps what we can't do. So I really think there's been a lot of work go in this and thought, and certainly have provided us with some options to try to address this issue. I want to say, Mr. Chair, that when I went through this, and he has laid out 9 options here in his report that he's presented, and in laying out these 9 options, I have to say that I went back after I read this report and carefully went through each option and read it a second time. And I have to say that the 4 that interest me are D, E, F, and G. And what is common amongst those, Mr. Chair, is the fact that all of them require an amendment to our zoning bylaw 1Z 2014. And that's what this municipality and most municipalities are missing, is a method or a form in their zoning bylaw to be able to control these things so that when they do operate, they're in the proper place and the proper mechanisms are in place to address the issues. This council is accountable, Mr. Chair, to the ratepayers and the citizens and the residents of this county. Even the type A, the large medical marijuana producing plants that we now have in the county, and there are many more to come, they're not a problem. They're an asset. They're an incredible asset. They're not causing the problems. And I suspect for the most part, although I don't know, and the laws changed this year for recreational personal, the 4 plants not to exceed a meter in every household in this country, I suspect that they won't be causing the problems that we're having with the situation we have here right now, and other municipalities have it. That's what we've got to get a handle on. And just a couple things before I ask my question to Matt, if I may. On page 3 of his report, I just wanted to highlight, I read this and I almost snickered. When Health Canada was here, planning staff asked representatives if, in fact, these reasonable measures to control odor, which is our number 1 problem, that and light, if in fact that it relates to the individual designated person's alternative cannabis production sites. And here was the response, and I quote, "Currently under the access to cannabis for medical purposes regulations, Mr. Chair, those who choose to produce cannabis for their own medical purposes are advised to take measures so that other people do not know that you are growing marijuana or producing cannabis for your own medical purposes, e.g., ensuring plants cannot be seen from outside your house or in your yard, and limiting marijuana smells coming from your production site." This is from Health Canada when they were here. Those who choose to produce cannabis, Mr. Chair, for their own medical purposes are advised. That just breaks me up. They're advised. Well, thank you for your advice. I'm going to ignore it and do what the heck I want. They're advised. That's a pretty strict regulation, isn't it? They're advising you that you can't stink up the neighborhood. You can't drive people out of their homes. You can't. If you want to, we advise you shouldn't do it, but you know what? We're not going to enforce it, and right now your municipalities can't enforce it. Okay, enough of that. That one blew me away. So, Mr. Chair, D, E, G, F, and G all will require an amendment to 1Z 2014. Matt, and I know that we're worried about limiting or prohibiting access, and I don't want to prohibit access. I just want people to get it right and do it right. That's all we're asking. You know, there's been some discussion here, can you still smell these things? Are you not driving around this county, folks? Are you not driving up and down our roads? I can take you to 7 or 8 sites right now that I'll tell you, you'll smell it. With my windows up. I have visited sites with Councillor Geisens, I've visited sites with Councillor Brunton. You think we don't have a problem here? Oh, man. People driven out of their homes because they can't sleep at night? We got to do something. But I want to ask Matt, Mr. Chair, sorry, I should leave my comments for debate, but G seems to be the one that puts the clamp down. And I want to say to council, do not be afraid of getting your neck on the chopping block here with the government, with Health Canada, with human rights. Get aggressive on this and getting it under control. Be a leader here now in this province, here and now. I'm usually a pretty cautious person. But we got to get our handle on this, Mr. Chair, and we got to have people that are going to do this because they have a note from the doctor and they have a right to have a prescription and they have a right to grow it, but there has to be a way of doing it because we have to be able to handle the complaints and make sure that it doesn't affect others as Health Canada so advises. So number G, to me, is the most the hardest to come down, and Matt, your comments are and concerns are similar to mine in respect that we have to be careful that we don't have something or put something in place that absolutely no one can access the right to grow it, because this way of growing it is legal, but it has to be done. Mr. Chair, if G was enforced or put in place, it would require a zoning bylaw amendment. G would, so would D, so would E, so would F. So far, they're on the same playing field. If we endorse G, it would be subject to a public meeting. So not only would these applicants applying for a zoning amendment have to come before this council in public, like every other zoning application comes in public, they would also be in front of their neighbors. Because their neighbors are entitled to come to a public meeting and speak in favor or against the zoning. And we heard, and I say this respectful to my colleague, Councillor Height, some of these people may be very much reluctant to do that. His point is very well made. It's a medical requirement. I get that. But I hope these people are just as concerned as the neighbor family that can't sleep in their house at night because of the odor they're creating. Subject to a public meeting and site plan control would also be used to future regulate. Matt, question through the chair to you. G, in your opinion, is the toughest regulation of all 9 options?
Through the chair, H would be the toughest regulation because it would deem the growth, production, and processing of cannabis to be not an agricultural permitted use, which means that not only would they need a zoning bylaw amendment in order to put that new AONIS use on their property, they'd also need an official plan amendment, which, it ups the ante a little bit in terms from a land use perspective.
Mr. Chair, I didn't quite interpret H that, didn't think of it quite that way in not allowing it in the agriculture zone. And currently we allow it in the type A in agriculture and of course the industrial. So my last question then, based on Mr. Chair Matt's response, would be in number G, if the public meeting is the issue of someone that needs medical marijuana, but has to have something that is accountable to council, could you work at that? You wouldn't need the public meeting, but did you mention that just site plan control? Tell me again how that,
Sure.
how that would work, because that has kind
through
of really
the-
got me interested.
Through the chair, if you wanted a future applicant to be able to avoid a public meeting,
Yes?
then option F is the option you would want to choose. Because option F, if they're located in an agricultural or industrial area, the use would be permitted outright. So provided they met the criteria where they self-regulate and they have the odor controls, they can be 150 meters from an adjacent sensitive land use, just like our zoning bylaw currently regulates the marijuana production facilities. If they don't, and they emit the odors, then the larger buffer requirement would be imposed.
Thank you, I understand that now. The noxious odor or the noxious part of it, would that be included in the bylaw? An F?
Through the chair, that's option D. That's the amendment to that.
You got too many options for me to keep
I
straight.
know, right? It's
But not in F.
Option D and F are two different things, but option D complements option F.
Okay.
Option D complements most of the options.
Mr. Chair, that's all I have for now, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Oliver.
Mr. Chairman, for letting me ask another question, just briefly on this last point. Option D, Matt, I really see the merit of doing that, amending our bylaw to recognize obnoxious uses. I'm uncomfortable with the fact that you have chosen to include the production and processing of mushrooms as another example of an obnoxious process or issue in the same way that marijuana is. Has that been done in response to complaints?
Through the chair, it has not been done in the response of complaints. It has been done in a fair analysis of what is a crop and what is considered to be odorous in its production and growth. So I'm thinking ahead. I'm thinking ahead to if we are challenged in our decision making. We need to be shown to be inclusive in how we came up with the decision we did. And in my analysis of what noxious use is, it's something that creates an odor, it creates a contaminant, and has the ability to affect a neighbor and as a result cause adverse effect. So your enjoyment of your property, your health, and etc. Marijuana is not the only crop that does that. Mushrooms is another crop that could potentially do that. And it's another crop that is similar in the fact that it's grown indoors, it could be grown year-round. So I'm just painting them with the same brush.
Yeah, I understand that, and I guess it's actually not the growing of the mushrooms, it's the creating of the medium in which the mushroom grows that potentially can cause odor problems, and that wouldn't necessarily be on the same property, although I acknowledge that it usually is. But should we decide to implement option D, we don't necessarily, I assume, have to list production and processing of mushrooms as an example of obnoxious uses. Is that correct?
Through the chair, if that's council's wish, then no, we wouldn't have to list that as an obnoxious
Thank you.
use.
Councillor Black, you're up.
Well, are we ready for a motion?
We have a couple more speakers.
Oh, well, okay. I'll wait for, I do have another question, but
Okay.
I do have a motion ready here when you're ready. Through you to Matt. I'm just wondering if it did put a motion forward, would D, E, F, and G all fit? Would they work in conjunction with each other if all four of those were adopted?
Through the chair, it would be, it would cause some confusion to do them all. It would make more sense to choose D and E or F or G. So choosing choosing E, F, and G, they all accomplish different things. One is a bit more extreme than the other. So if you only, like, F does everything E does, G does everything F and E do. Do you know what I mean?
How about D and G?
Yep. So for instance, if you chose to do D and G, or D and F, those would be a good policy options as they would complement each other.
Oh, okay, I'll wait until the others have asked their questions.
I'll tell you now, when we deal with the motion, I'm going to deal with each one individually. I don't
Okay.
want them lumped together. Too much confusion, okay?
Yeah, that's a
All
good
right.
idea.
Let's go on to Councillor Brunton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, to allow me to speak again. And I wanted to, I got thinking about this after I read through the page 121 in our agenda, which is the policy comparison for other municipalities, and something, Matt, that caught my attention, and maybe I'm wrong here, and I don't certainly know the process for marijuana that well, but when, to date, I have been only, and I have been involved with the mayor at greenhouses that emit odor because of the marijuana grow operations, and they're really commercial growing operations that are not sanctioned. I'll use that word, okay? They're not, I guess, sanctioned by the federal government. They're growing the 250 plants for 4 or 5 people, I guess, that need 50 grams a day, as you say in your report. But my concern is that we're not dealing with, if we can put some kind of site plan on it, like the next thing I see is, will they not be using the strip rooms to process things, or maybe some of them will get into making some kind of capsules or oils in their strip rooms, turning it into a business. Maybe they'll make brownies in their strip rooms. So does that not have to be encompassed somehow in the bylaw for not just a greenhouse? Like, to date, that's where I've been thinking that we got to regulate a greenhouse operation, but there's more to it than just a greenhouse. There could be the strip rooms and whatever else facilities they have on a farm. We're in the prime growing area with all these facilities. So would that be encompassed in some of these alternatives?
Through the chair, they would. So the idea of creating a new definition that speaks to alternative agricultural uses,
Yeah.
it identifies it as it being a site and not necessarily just a greenhouse, or
Okay.
not just necessarily one building. And the idea behind it is to capture everything, to capture the growth, the production, the processing, every angle.
Yeah, I don't know the process, but do they have to dry this stuff out in some form or another? And I mean, to make oils, do they have to have some kind of a press operation or whatever? Is that?
Yeah, through the chair, my understanding is it's somewhat similar to tobacco, where it has to be dried or cured. There's, depending on if you're the product you're making, whether it be oil or a concentrated THC, you're processing it in one way, either with distillates or pressing it, or making seed oil with, like, that would be the pressing part of it. So there are, quite a few different processes that are involved in processing this plant, yes.
So it could take up a lot of facilities on an existing farm.
Through the chair, yeah, it could take up quite a few different facilities. And what's interesting is if these were legitimate businesses, which were, treated like our medical marijuana production facilities, it would offer a really great employment opportunity here in the county. I had a chat with one of our committee members on our task force, and she's on the Agricultural Advisory Board, and she has a really good in-depth knowledge of greenhouse operations. And she said that a medical marijuana production facility requires 8 times as many employees as what a traditional greenhouse does, just based on the sort of growth, life of the plant and everything else. So, a legitimate business offers a great employment opportunity for the county. So there is some potential here to do some great things.
So whatever we come up, I think we owe it to these people to get it right. I think the mayor mentioned that. Let's, even though there could be changes down the line, I think we owe it to get it right now as far as we're concerned to try and cover all the bases. So, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Height again, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for allowing me for some more questions. Appreciate that comment, Matt, about the workers. I know in my area it's a big deal. I have a lot of people that are employed by these places, and they probably wouldn't find a lot of jobs elsewhere, and they're really happy, and they're a big employer. But I'm looking at the zoning provisions for other municipalities. I see Brant, Haldeman, Oxford. None of them really do any of this. So,
Through the chair, the municipalities that have been listed here are more or less catching up with the original version of the ACMPR. They're putting in regulations regarding medical marijuana production. They're not addressing individual or designated grower or the Part 2 production sites. We're a leader in this. We've done our research. We've looked at other municipalities, and not just in Ontario. We've looked in other provinces. I've even looked into the U.S. and Oregon and Washington to see if I could find some science coming out of any of those states, just to help us formulate these policies and regulations. So.
And through the chair, I would add, Councillor Height, that our surrounding municipalities are watching us. I've received phone calls today, and councils are wondering what we're doing, and they're looking for your decision tonight, and they're looking for that information.
yeah, thank you for that. The problem with being the leader is we'll also be the leader in lawsuits. But how would you go about enforcing of odor? So who's to decide? Is there an electronic sniffer that we'll be sending our bylaw guys out with and saying that it's too strong, that smell?
Through the chair, my experience tells me that if I were to take a trip out to our only medical marijuana production facility in existence today, American, which does have odor regulation in place, you could stand outside of it and not be able to smell it. You don't know what they're growing in there. Obviously, it's very high security, but you can't tell from a smell perspective what they're growing. Any of these other places, it's very obvious. From a bylaw perspective, it's probably just the presence of the odor, and it would be complaint basis that we'd be notified about them, and that's how things would get triggered then.
I guess I have a bit of a dilemma with that, because the odor for outdoor greenhouses without the lights and the whole high-powered setup you're talking about is for a limited time for people that grow smaller amounts. And so it could be the equivalent of a skunk smell, and all of a sudden they're having bylaw down there to clamp down on them. And so there has to be a limit, I would think.
Through the chair, so one of the interesting things that's coming out as part of the new regs, the federal regulations, is commercial facilities that are built on a micro scale. So, for instance, the one and only medical marijuana production facility we have in the county today, it's massive, and it's going to become larger sort of day by day. But the federal government is looking at creating policies so that smaller facilities could come in. So a facility, say, that would be 500 square feet or 1,000 square feet could come in, but in order for them to be a commercial facility, they need odor control. So even regardless of how big those facilities are, if they want to play by the same rules as the big guys or girls, they have to play by the same rules and have the same odor protection and everything else in place. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And my last question, I guess, where did you come up with the setbacks? Is it the same setback for 10,000 plants as it is for 100 plants?
Through the chair, our existing policy now that is 150 meters for the medical marijuana production facilities was actually determined by council. In addition to that, creating a larger buffer for facilities that would not be self-regulated. Like I said, I'm not sure what that number would be. We need to do a little bit more research, but it would be more than what we have today.
So let me give you, for an example. If somebody had a license to grow 25 plants, had a decent-sized lot, they wouldn't be able to grow it. Is that correct? Not in town or in a hamlet, not with your 150-meter buffer.
Through the chair, it would depend on what type of facility they had. If they, if they had an outdoor facility or if they had an indoor facility, and the size of the lot would come into play. So if they had a large lot and they were able to meet that 150-meter setback and comply with the zoning bylaw, then they could do that. If they had a smaller lot, say one of the more rural residential lots, they wouldn't have that option, but they'd still have the option of designating someone to do it for them.
But we eliminate their ability to grow their own medicine, though, because 150 meters is a big chunk of land, especially in like a more hamlet setting or an urban setting. So would that not infringe on their rights?
Through the chair, the options that have been put forward only address the agricultural and industrial zones. So this isn't something that's contemplated in the hamlet areas. As of July 1st, everyone can do the 4 plants per household. So we are going to see that in the hamlet areas. We're going to see it in the residential areas. So it is going to become much more present than it is today. And I think it's, there is an element to that odor that we will all get used to. But it's these larger facilities that are creating a lot of that odor to the point where people are feeling sick that we're trying to zone for.
That's right, a few bad apples. Thank you, Matt.
Councillor Columbus. Okay. Anyone else? I think it's time for decisions here. Like I said, I want to deal with these on an individual basis. Councillor Black, you're anxious to make a motion. I'd like you to make a motion on one option.
Try this to receive the report as information and to amend the Norfolk County zoning bylaw to include option, well, I'll just try one. D. Okay, I'm going to start off with D.
D as in Delta,
Yeah,
right?
And further, that Norfolk County staff continue to monitor and update council on the cannabis issues, just so it doesn't end here. I think staff talked about that, and just to include that. So D is...
Okay. Could I have a seconder? Mayor Luke has seconded. Any other discussion? Councillor Oliver?
Mr. Chair, I support the motion, but I'd like to try a friendly amendment if the mover and seconder would go for it, and that is that because it says right in under D that we would add examples to the bylaw's definition of noxious use and included production and processing of mushrooms as one of the examples. I would like to see that not included under this amendment, if the mover and seconder would support that at this time.
Is that all right? Yeah. I know, it's not a big deal.
You want the mushrooms removed?
Thank you.
Okay.
Just as an example, thank you.
Done. Okay, we have a motion and a seconder on option D. All in favor? That is carried.
So, somebody else want to try? Do you want me to try another one?
Anyone else want to make a motion? Councillor Black, go ahead.
Well, the same, I guess, I don't know, repeat the motion, but include G?
Option G as in golf. Further seconder? Geisens has seconded. All those in favor? Wait. Okay, sorry. Okay. Discussion. Councillor Height.
Mr. Chair, we've heard this will take us into the Charter of Rights lawsuit. If we're going to go to G, we might as well just buy up the problem properties. Well, it'll probably be a discount to Norfolk County taxpayers. At the very least, we might as well pay for their lawsuits. Because you get in the Charter of Rights things, you're talking years and thousands of dollars. It's, clearly it infringes on it. We have legal advice. What are we thinking? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Ooh. And on we go. Oliver, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree with my colleague, except I wish he'd quit putting the idea of lawsuits into people's minds every other time he makes a comment. We don't need that. Mr. Chair, I support option F rather than G for some of the reasons that my colleague said a moment ago. I would also just mention to council that if you flip back to page 102, our own Ag Advisory Board was asked to consider and discuss this, and they have supported option D and option F. So I can't support this one, but if it happens to fail and option F comes up, I will certainly support that.
Councillor Columbus speaking to this.
Yes, and I do recall what I was going to ask, and I can put it forward now with respect to item G. What happens to the existing in-place operations that have been there for the last year or two? What happens with those? Do they get grandfathered under G, or do they have to apply for a zoning amendment?
Through the chair, if they are identified as an noxious use, then they would not be legal. And they would not have previously been legal, therefore the grandfathering clause wouldn't apply to them. So, but this is a complaint basis. So through the chair, if they've been flying under the radar because nobody smells what they're doing, that may be something that may continue in the future.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Can't read my writing here. Councillor Brunton, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm on page 100 here for a minute, and I'm not sure what I'm supporting. There's so many options here, but I support them all if they're going to cover the basis for us. Again, I want to get it right. But if you look on page 100, the task force committee recommended B, D, and G be combined, and we, I guess, adopt those. So I would like to see us adopt all those. Now, I don't want to make a motion yet because I think Matt and Pam and Chris have all heard the discussion here tonight. I'd like to see them combine this thing somehow and include all our concerns. Plain and simple. Like, we can go around here and we might as well just adopt all the recommendations and let you sort it out. That's the way I look at it. Like, do it. Do it. We're concerned. We want to protect the public, but we realize it's going to be a problem. But can you do that without us battering around all these different options, or do you not feel comfortable with that?
Through the chair, if so options F, G, and H are going to change the bylaw. So they will change the bylaw to add a new use which will encompass the production and processing of cannabis. If in addition to that, you would like the applicants to come back to you to request a zoning bylaw amendment and or an official plan amendment, then your option would be to choose G or H. If you're okay with just having them regulated so that hopefully nobody smells them again, then F would be your option to choose. Because F deals with them from a site plan perspective, it deals with it from an odor perspective. It gives them the option to either regulate their own odor or separate themselves enough so that nobody smells them.
And that will cover not just a greenhouse that might produce odors, but the whole, encompass everything, strip rooms that might be turned into something, etc.
That's correct. It would encompass the growth, the processing, and the whole kit and caboodle.
Okay, hit me with those again, those exact options.
So F, G, and H would fix the problem.
All right.
G and H would require them to come back before council to seek more relief.
Okay.
It's just a matter of whether or not you want them to come back after we've created a provision that would already regulate them.
Okay, so F, G, and H is all you need?
So if you didn't want them to come back to council to request relief, F would be the option you'd want to choose. If you want them to come back to a public forum in which their neighbors would comment and everybody within the circulation radius would comment, you would choose G or H. H is